After returning from a night to celebrate the arrival of the new year, my husband and I returned to our apartment complex to turn in for the night. We both had a couple of drinks, but neither of us were intoxicated. As much as we enjoy partying with friends, when it comes down to it, we are really just homebodies. We lived in the corner penthouse suite of our complex. Although this was never confirmed, it was suspected the owners wanted to convert this apartment complex into condos. The rent certainly was not cheap, and access was limited to this floor. Upon entering the building, there is a walk-up to secure doors, and every now and then there would be a doorman to greet you as you entered or exited. There were also multiple security cameras placed throughout and around the building. It was an especially cold evening, and when we returned, there was no doorman present. It was late, at least 2:30 a.m. The foyer was empty, and one of the lights flickered softly. My husband and I entered the elevator and pressed the button to the top floor. The elevator ride was smooth, and as we ascended, I could feel myself becoming more relaxed, excited to finally be home and able to rest. My feet were killing me from wearing heels all night in the bitter cold. The bell chimed, signaling we had reached our floor. The door slid open, and we turned the corner to the left. Like I said, our suite was the corner suite at the end of the hall. However, something caught our eye. A woman, or what at least looked like a woman, was meandering through the hallway. Her hair was dark and scattered, it looked to be matted and covered her face. She wore a black lace dress that was torn and looked to be in bad shape. Thinking back, I don't even think she had any footwear on. We assumed she was intoxicated and was having difficulty finding her suite. Although on closer inspection, she didn't look familiar. We knew all of our neighbors, as, like I said, access was limited on this floor. I looked at my husband, who stood still as well. I could see he was contemplating the same thoughts. I asked him, should we ask if she needs help? He looked at me and said, just wait, maybe she's just drunk and having a hard time finding her suite. The woman just continued to slowly slide herself along the walls of the hallway, stopping at each door and peering through the exterior peepholes. Admittedly, this was creepy, but it just added to the theory that she was a drunk woman looking for her friends. She was humming, or what I believe was humming. The sound was something between a growl and a hum. We stood there in utter disbelief and awe. However, there was a veil of tension and uneasiness that lingered. The strange woman stumbled through the hallway, hunched over, until she pulled herself up to peer through the peephole. She eventually got to a suite of an elderly lady, whom I have a strong connection with. We'll just call her Evelyn. Evelyn was the sort of woman whose family had neglected her and rarely visited. She would bring my husband and me baked goods from time to time. I would bring her leftovers and assist her with groceries and medication. Frequently, Evelyn's smoke alarm would constantly go off. I would have to rush over and pull out the smoldering toast from her toaster and fan her smoke alarm until it stopped beeping. At times, a nuisance, but it would always turn into tea time. Nevertheless, I cared about Evelyn. So when I saw this strange woman peer into her peephole, I reacted. I blurted out, "Excuse me, are you all right?" I could feel myself lose confidence as I asked. The strange woman seemed to shudder for a moment and hunched over to the floor. She looked like she was about to puke or was frightened by my voice. My husband and I stepped closer, but the woman then let out a series of soft and menacing laughs, just barely audible. I have to admit, in this moment I was thoroughly creeped out and reached for my cell phone. It was uncomfortable because we couldn't get to our suite. Without having to walk right past this deranged woman, my husband said, "Hey, did you hear us? Do you need help?" Her laugh began to grow into what was a steady cackle. The strange woman then stood up. As she stood up, her cackle became a mixture between a cackle and a boisterous growl. She then stumbled forward and continued walking down the hall. There was a staircase just outside of our suite. I assumed she was making her way to the stairs, just too embarrassed to walk past us to the elevator. Maybe she was just a drunk woman, and this was nothing more than an uncomfortable standoff with a sad and intoxicated woman. I mean, if she was really that drunk, the stairs probably weren't a good idea. We were on the 7th floor. Nevertheless, I just didn't feel like it was worth the risk to engage with this woman. I just wanted to enter my suite and dive into bed. It was late, and my feet still hurt. As we took a few steps forward, the woman stopped, almost with laser precision. She stood up completely straight, looked right at our door, and then began to pound on our door, screaming bloody murder. I could feel myself becoming swallowed with fear. I reached for my cell phone and began to dial 911. The woman kept pounding on our door and screaming. To be honest, I'm surprised none of our neighbors came out to see what was happening. Part of me thinks they were too afraid themselves and were probably peering out of their peepholes. Afraid of what our neighbors would think, my husband said, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop that." And just like that, the strange woman stopped, fell to the ground, and began crawling quickly towards us. She looked up for a brief second. All I could see were her dark eyes. Her mouth seemed to be stained black, and she was growling again, but this time it was as if there was something in her throat that she was choking on. Frozen with fear, my husband and I just watched until she flashed us a menacing hiss, the kind you would hear in a movie but never imagined in real life. Terrified, I whipped off my shoes, and my husband and I ran towards the staircase on the other side of the building. We didn't want to risk waiting for the elevator and have her catching up. We went down 2 flights of stairs and stopped to listen if she was making her way down the stairs, but it was almost impossible to hear as my heart was pounding so hard. I thought to myself, what the hell was going on? We waited there for 10 minutes or so until eventually, we had the courage to head up the stairs and back to our suite. The woman was gone, and so we entered our suite. I was just relieved to finally be safe in my home. My husband sent a text to our landlord, and he replied that we would hear from him in the morning. I was so unbelievably exhausted but found it incredibly difficult to sleep. The sound of that woman's growling and cackling rang in my ears. I hardly slept. The next day, when my husband went to speak to the landlord, he asked him to check the security cameras. Although nothing turned up, the landlord said the cameras glitched due to the frigid temperatures last night. To this day, I still don't know what to think. That woman most certainly had problems. The question is, was she dangerous? We moved about a year later, but every New Year's Eve, I still think about that night. It was New Year's Eve of 2020, and all of us were ready for this horrible year to be over. A couple of years ago, when I was in college, I went to a New Year's Eve party. For a little bit of background, I'm a female and lived on campus but went home for winter break. My parents' house was only about an hour away from campus, and I had a few friends who went back to school early. There was going to be a New Year's Eve party at one of my best friend's houses on campus, so I went back there for it. First, I went back to my college apartment and then arrived at my friend's on New Year's Eve at about 5 p.m. I was one of the first people there, and we just kind of hung out until the other people came over. For a long time, it was a lot of fun, and a lot of my college friends were there, but like many college parties that I went to, things soon became a little bit out of control. A lot more people started to show up at like 10 p.m. or so. The college that I went to is a very large university. I'm not sure how many people attended, but probably well over 25,000 or 30,000. The house soon had a lot of people that I didn't even recognize in it. I was still having a good time, though, until this one guy came up to me. He was a man who looked to be in his 29-year-old and had a tall, somewhat muscular build. Now, he wasn't jacked or anything, but he also wasn't fat. He was just big. He came right up to me, seeming drunk, and started asking me questions about myself. We talked, but not long into the conversation, he asked if I wanted to leave with him. I said no. He kept asking, and I soon walked away. It was very crowded, and the guy followed me all around just about wherever I went. By that point, it was probably midnight, and I decided to just leave. I walked through the crowd of people and found my friends. I told one of them about the guy who was following me, and then I said I would be leaving. I tried to point him out in the crowd, but at that point, I couldn't find him. Then I said bye to my friend, and I left. When I first got outside, I thought that the guy had finally given up. I didn't see him, and I was walking back to my apartment, which was only a few blocks away. But when I started to walk down the street, I heard somebody leaving the house and turned around to see the guy. He yelled at me, asking me where I was going. I told him that I was going home, and he started to walk towards me. Now I was concerned that he was going to follow me all the way back to my apartment. I tried to just ignore him and walk away and hoped that he would stop, but he didn't. I heard him walking down the street after me, trying to catch up. I walked as fast as I could without running. When I made it to where I had to turn, he was still behind me. He was a long way back, so I tried to lose him. I cut through a random person's yard and then went through their backyard. Once I got through there, I cut into the next block over and then walked the other way down the street. This ended up working, and when I got off of that street, I no longer saw him. I was able to make it back to my apartment, and I even checked outside when I got back to make sure that he didn't somehow follow me. Everything was fine, and I went to bed shortly after. The next day, I went back to my parents' house because classes didn't start for college for about 2 more weeks. After driving back home, I arrived sometime in the early afternoon. It was then that I saw I was added on Snapchat by someone. It was a guy named Basil. I didn't automatically assume that it was the same guy from the night before. My college was so big, and I knew a lot of people and didn't have all their snaps. To be honest, I got added by people on almost a daily basis, plus I didn't even recall this guy telling me his name the night before. But after the guy added me on Snapchat, he said hi to me, and I asked him who he was. He responded, saying we met last night, remember? That's when I realized it was the same person. Still, I asked him to clarify. He said he was at the party and then described himself. When he did, I blocked him. I wanted nothing to do with this guy because, after all, he had tried to follow me home. After that, he did not contact me, but the story doesn't end there. That night, I was at my parents' house in my bedroom. I noticed out of my window a car parked on the side of the road out front. It was kind of weird because our neighborhood was quiet and everybody's houses had long driveways with plenty of space to park. Plus, the car was parked like 20 feet from our driveway. It was a very typical looking sedan, but I couldn't see if anybody was inside or not because it was too far away. I decided to get up and walk over to the window to get a little bit better view. When I did, literally right when I got to the window, I saw the driver's door open. A man got out, and at first, I had no clue who it was. But then the guy came into our driveway and walked along the side of it. When he got a little bit closer, I realized it was the same guy. This really blew my mind. At first, I was not even near campus. I was at my parents' house an hour away. Why was he here? I watched him walk all the way up the driveway, but he didn't go into the front yard. Instead, he went around the side of the house and out of my view. It seemed as though he was going into the back. I hurried out of my room and found my parents. I told them about the guy, and then I called the police. We carefully went to a window in the back of the house and looked out to try to see the guy. It was really dark back there with many opportunities for places for him to hide. We didn't see him, but we knew that he was back there somewhere. For the next few minutes, he remained hidden. Then the police arrived. They came to the front door, and we let them know that the guy was probably hiding in the backyard. Our property was searched, and the man was located. He tried to run away but was caught before making it off of our property. It turned out that the guy didn't even go to my college. He had found my location through the brief time that he had me on Snapchat because my location was on. This is an experience that is still almost unbelievable to me to this day. I feel lucky that I noticed the car and saw the man get out. If I didn't, I would not have known that it was his car or that he was hiding in the backyard. What he planned to do, I'm not sure, but I'm glad that we called the police. When I was 12, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up and from there, they divorced. My mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they had gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was habitually leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town. I knew most of the people, if not by name then by face, enough to wave and have a small chat with. I had never been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on the USA channel, and I had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 12, I wasn't concerned with the electricity bills or even saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party or people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off of the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen and leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off of the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started, as slowly and as quietly as I could, to make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide and seek in the dark many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything, it was just like they were moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the doorway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream, however, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and I ran down the hallway. I believe the only reason I wasn't grabbed by now is because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children would do when they're afraid. I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and I ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time as it was right off the side of the couch. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked and the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it certainly wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking and on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. That after he had stopped, though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure. I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. It was also several feet off the ground as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified, for what felt like hours. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what had happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why. Scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there, I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out this kind of window was a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated person. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house. That's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked back up the steps and started peering inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, meaning no terrifying man leering at me basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe at how stupid this could have turned out, and I wish I would have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, and anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterward. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and I noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, and checked all the windows and front door. Then I called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker, who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on. This happened just last year. It was New Year's Eve, and my wife and I were having friends over to our house. There were about 15 other people coming over, and we were going to have somewhat of a party. After everybody arrived, we had some food, and I talked with everyone. We played some games as well. My wife and I have a house that has about a 2-acre yard and is somewhat out in the country. At 12 o'clock, we all went outside and into the backyard behind the house to open champagne. Obviously, we didn't want to open it inside and have it spray all over the furniture, plus it wasn't that cold out. We stayed outside in the backyard for maybe a total of 10 minutes, then everybody went back in. All of our friends stayed until roughly 1 a.m. and then started leaving. By 1:30, everyone was gone. My wife and I cleaned up a bit and were very tired. I remember that my wife went upstairs to our bedroom, and I was finishing up loading the dishwasher downstairs in the kitchen. After I did so, I started to walk away, and I heard what I thought was my wife walking down the hallway. The hallway was out of my sight, it was kind of near the stairs, and I was around the corner from it. I called out my wife's name, wondering why she'd come back down, but she didn't answer me. I remember that I walked over there, which took me maybe 10 seconds. When I got there, I saw nothing. I was sort of confused, but I figured that my wife hadn't heard me calling for her and she just went back upstairs. I went upstairs and then got ready for bed. I didn't bother to ask her if she had just been downstairs or anything. So after I got ready, I turned out the lights and got in bed. Everything became silent, and that's when my wife asked me if I heard that. I hadn't heard anything. I sat up and asked her what she had heard, and she told me that it sounded like somebody was walking around downstairs. I listened closely, and then I sort of heard it. I walked over to the doorway and opened it up very quietly. Now I could hear much better, and somebody was definitely down there. They must have been who I had heard earlier. It really creeped me out, but then I heard the footsteps starting to walk up the stairs. I quickly closed the door back up and locked it. My wife already had her phone and was dialing 911. We then went into the bathroom connected to our bedroom, which also had a locking door on it. This would give us a little bit of extra space and safety. We were told that the police would be there within 10 minutes. As we were inside of the bathroom, we didn't really hear much. We were both trying to figure out who the person in the house was and how they had gotten in. Then out of nowhere, I heard somebody banging on our bedroom door. I did my best to try to ignore it. Hopefully, whoever was there would not be able to break through. This went on for quite some time though. At one point, it stopped, but then it picked back up again several minutes later. Finally, at last, the police arrived. When they did, they entered the house, and I heard them yelling from downstairs. I really couldn't hear what they were saying though. We did not leave the bathroom because it wasn't safe to come out yet. We heard yelling on and off for the next 10 minutes. Finally, we heard police officers' voices, and we were told that it was safe. The person inside of our house was a man who we didn't know. He was caught and had snuck into the house after we all went outside. Then he hid until we were going to go to bed. When the police got there, he threatened them and claimed to have a weapon, even though he didn't. Eventually, they were able to get him to come downstairs. I think the guy was on drugs or something. He did mess up our house a little bit, but I'm glad that everyone was okay. I still can't believe that while our friends and us were inside, the guy was hiding in our house somewhere. That was the craziest New Year's Eve ever. A few years ago, when I was 18, I was coming home from watching the fireworks display on New Year's Eve. It was 3 a.m. when I reached my safe, family-friendly, nothing ever happens neighborhood. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and live in a posher and wealthier area. My friends wanted to call a taxi because we didn't want to wake our poor parents at this hour to drive us back home, but because of my stubbornness and insistence, we ended up taking the very long walk home. My friend Kieran was complaining most of the time. I guess I can't blame him. Bevis was just silent and compliant, and I was cheerful. When we reached almost my street, we split ways. The guys went on their very long walk home, which was way longer than mine, and I continued on mine. When I passed a little cake shop, I noticed a guy across the street. I only looked at him briefly, but something in the way he quickly looked up at me, almost with interest, caught my attention. I hurried on anyway because I'm usually paranoid about things, and 99% of the time, it's just me being paranoid. I turned onto my street, which was much darker than I had anticipated. This was about 3:15 a.m., mind you. As I passed the bowling club, I kept looking behind me just to make sure. It was getting quite cold and dark, so I started feeling creeped out, but there was no one behind me, no one anywhere as far as I could see. I was halfway down my street where the road dips down when I noticed something on the path in front of me. I couldn't tell what it was, and at the last minute, I stepped off the path onto the road to avoid it because it looked like it might be a dead animal. As I stepped onto the road, I turned slightly and saw that there was someone behind me. They weren't too close, but they weren't too far away either, and I remember my heart leaping into my throat because I hadn't seen them before, and for them to have gotten that close in that short space of time, something about it didn't sit well with me. When I told people about this later, they said that I should have been quite suspicious then. It was 3 a.m. in the morning, and you're quietly walking behind a girl, not even bothering to keep a safe distance. Like, if you're really innocent, you would take measures to emphasize that, right? I couldn't see who it was, nor could I tell if it was male or female because it was just a black figure to me. It was a very brief glimpse. I was scared, though, so I whipped out my phone and started to call Kieran. I kept calling him, but silly Vodafone couldn't connect to him. So I tried to call Bevis, but he wouldn't pick up. I kept this up at least 5 times, getting increasingly anxious but daring not to look behind me to see if he was still there. I'm glad I didn't actually. I think I would have really freaked out if I had confirmed it. By that time, I'd reached my driveway, and I hurried up it thinking I was safe. But as I was halfway up, I looked over my shoulder again, just really quickly, and I saw the figure there again. The way I explained this next bit is going to be hard because I was really confused and muddled. On one hand, it may have looked like he was merely passing my driveway, but on the other hand, I am much more certain that it looked like he was just about to step onto the driveway as if to walk up. At that precise moment that I thought that, it occurred to me that he might be my brother Hubert because no one else would bother walking up my driveway. Even if some guy was following me, it never occurred to me that he would really go to the lengths of going up my driveway as well. I thought I was completely safe because I had the advantage of having my house close by when he started following me. However, something about the build of this figure didn't seem like Hubert to me, so I hurried on anyway. My beautiful, wonderful, amazing mother had stayed up to wait for me, and I'm so glad because she opened the door for me as soon as I knocked. I hate to imagine what would have happened if I'd had to wait for a while. I went inside, but I left the second door open and the outside light on because I thought Hubert might be coming in any second now. But Mom was like, "You can turn them off. Your brother came back 2 hours ago." I did get a little bit creeped out, but I just dismissed the thought because we are so quick to always think we're safe. I closed the door, shut off the light, and went to get a drink of water, and Mom went to bed. I went to my room to grab my clothes and then went to the bathroom to take a shower. I switched off the living room lights. This is sort of funny now that I think about it. Before I took a shower, I replied back to a message from Kieran, who was asking if I was home safe yet. I demanded to know why he hadn't picked up his phone and then told him I was creeped out for a few minutes, but I was okay now. As I showered, I actually thought about that figure. I wasn't too convinced that it was following me, but my mind did teeter into wondering this or that. In any case, I remember thinking that it was okay because I was safe now. Near the end of my shower, I heard something at the window. It didn't sound like the usual creaking or bumping of an old house. The way I described it to other people was like the sound of someone resting their hands against the window to steady themselves. It sounded really unnatural. I know because it caught my attention straight away, and I immediately jumped to the possibility that there might be someone outside. I know that only a really strange sound would make me do what I did next, which was to turn off the water and crouch under the window, hiding and waiting. I waited for quite some time, too scared to move for a few minutes, but there was nothing. So I gingerly crawled out, still too scared to stand up properly, and I switched off the bathroom lights. But then it was impossible for me to dry myself and dress myself, so I turned on the heater light, which is much smaller and dimmer. As I did that, I noticed that there was a very small blue light there that certainly didn't belong there. The way I can describe it now, it was almost like a keypad of a phone lit up. I was scared, but I switched off the heater light as well and backed into the corner, my towel wrapped around me, and I waited. It seemed like a long time that I waited, too scared to unlock the door and move because I knew it would make a lot of noise. As I waited in the pitch darkness, several blue lights came on outside the window. A few became very bright, and they were moving, trying to shine through the window. Now that I think about it, it had to be a phone, but I'm not sure because there were a few lights. But that did it for me because I practically bolted for my mom. I unlocked the door and went into my parents' room, trembling like a leaf and gibbering that there was someone outside the bathroom window. I was clearly very upset, so Mom ushered me around, trying to find a safe room for me to change into. Dad apparently heard the footsteps hurrying back down the driveway, and I'm glad he did because the situation feels so surreal to me now that I'm not even sure if it really happened. Maybe I imagined it all, but this is confirmation that it wasn't just my imagination. I was so shaky, and I slid into bed and couldn't sleep until morning. Even when it was morning, I was terrified, especially when I heard Dad leave the house and go into the backyard. That was the lesson I learned. I'm never walking home again at night. I'm even a bit worried during the daytime now. We never did find out who it was. People wonder if it was the same person I passed earlier, but for some reason, I didn't think so. My brother doesn't think so either. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.